Something has been taken from you, not stolen exactly. Not destroyed, just quietly allowed to fade. Over generations, the way a path through a forest disappears when nobody walks it anymore. The path is still there technically. The ground still holds the shape of it, but the grass has grown back over it so completely that you would never know it existed unless someone older pointed it out. Your ancestors walked that path every day for hundreds of thousands of years. You have probably never walked it once. There are things your great-great-grandparents could do that you cannot. There are things their great-great-grandparents could do that nobody alive today can do at all. Not because the knowledge is gone from the world entirely, but because the chain of transmission was broken. The elder who knew stopped passing it down. The child who should have learned was busy with something else. The skill that kept 100 generations alive became, in the span of a few decades, a hobby for enthusiasts or a footnote in an anthropology paper. This is the story of 5 of those skills. Not as a eulogy, as a reckoning with what the modern world cost you in the process of giving you everything it gave you. The first skill is tracking, not the casual kind. Not noticing that a deer was here because the grass is flat, and the deep kind. The kind that Louis Liebenberg, who spent decades studying the sand trackers of the Kalahari, described as a form of scientific reasoning so sophisticated that it parallels the hypothetico-deductive method of formal science. A master tracker reads a landscape the way a radiologist reads an X-ray. The compression pattern in a footprint tells the weight and gait of the animal. The angle of broken grass stems tells the direction of travel and the speed. The disturbance at the edge of a water source tells what species drank there when. And how many. A set of tracks in a dry riverbed tells a story of predator and prey that unfolded 3 days ago. And the tracker can reconstruct it the way a detective reconstructs a crime scene. This skill took years to develop. It was taught by elders who had spent entire lifetimes learning to read the earth. It required daily practice. Daily contact with wild terrain, daily engagement with the consequences of being wrong. In a world where being wrong meant going hungry, the incentive for accuracy was absolute. You have almost certainly never been taught to track. Most of your grandparents were not taught either. The chain broke sometime in the last century for most people in the industrialized world, when the economic incentive to read landscapes shifted from hunting to manufacturing. The skill did not disappear everywhere, but it disappeared from the daily life of most of the humans on Earth. The second skill is fire, not with a lighter, not with matches, not with a ferro rod. With friction, the bow drill method, the hand drill method, the fire plow. The creation of flame from nothing but wood, patience, and the intimate understanding of which species of tree produce what kind of tinder coal, under what conditions of humidity and temperature. In 2003, archaeologist Johann Heim documented that fewer than 15% of people who attempt the bow drill method for the first time succeed, even with coaching. This is not because the method is complicated, it is because the method requires calibrated embodied knowledge. The right downward pressure, the right spindle speed, the right fireboard species, the right notch geometry, the right tinder bundle moisture. These are not things you can learn by reading about them. They are things you learn by failing 30 times in the cold, and then, on the 31st attempt, seeing the coal form and understanding in your body, not your mind, what you did differently. For 100,000 years or more, every adult human on Earth possessed this skill. It was not optional, it was not a talent. It was as basic as knowing how to walk. Now it belongs to a small community of bushcraft practitioners and living history enthusiasts, most of whom had to seek it out deliberately as adults, because nobody had thought to pass it down. The third skill is wayfinding without instruments. Not GPS, not a compass, not a map. The ability to navigate through unfamiliar terrain using the sun, the stars, the wind, the behavior of animals, the pattern of vegetation, the shape of landforms, and the accumulated spatial memory of a landscape, learned over years of daily travel. Anthropologist Edwin Hutchins, in his research on distributed cognition, has argued that traditional wayfinding systems represent some of the most complex cognitive achievements in human history. The Polynesian navigators, who settled the Pacific crossing thousands of miles of open ocean without instruments, memorized the rising and setting positions of over 200 stars. They read wave patterns and wind shifts, and the behavior of clouds over land masses. They detected the presence of islands they could not yet see by the color of the water, and the flight paths of birds. This was not magic. It was knowledge accumulated and transmitted over generations with the same rigor that a modern engineering school transmits the principles of structural mechanics. Most people living today could not navigate home from a point 10 miles away in unfamiliar terrain without a phone. This is not an insult. It is an accurate description of what was lost when navigation moved from the body to the device. The fourth skill is plant identification and herbalism. Not the casual kind where you know that mint smells like mint, the deep kind, where you walk through a landscape and know, for every plant within sight, whether it is edible, medicinal, toxic, or useful for fiber or tinder or cordage, where you know which roots become edible when boiled, and which remain toxic regardless of preparation. Where you know which leaves reduce fever, and which bark relieves pain, and which seeds induce sleep, and which berries, despite looking exactly like safe ones, will kill a child within hours. Ethnobotanist Gary Paul Nabhan has spent decades documenting the traditional plant knowledge of indigenous communities in the American Southwest, and his research consistently shows the same pattern. Elders in their 70s and 80s possess plant vocabularies of 200 species or more. Their grandchildren, raised with access to supermarkets and pharmacies, know perhaps a dozen. The knowledge did not transfer. The incentive to learn it was removed before the transmission could happen, and it matters. The World Health Organization estimates that approximately 25% of modern pharmaceutical drugs are derived from or modeled on plant compounds that were first identified through traditional indigenous plant knowledge. Your antibiotic comes from a mold that medieval healers noticed killed bacteria. Your aspirin comes from willow bark that tribal healers prescribed for pain and inflammation for thousands of years. Before anyone understood why it worked, the modern medical system did not replace traditional plant knowledge from scratch. It built on top of it, extracted the most profitable elements, and then largely abandoned the rest. The fifth skill is the one nobody talks about. Perhaps because it is the hardest to quantify and the hardest to grieve. It is the skill of stillness. Not meditation in the modern therapeutic sense, not mindfulness as a stress reduction technique. The ancient functional ability to be completely motionless and completely present for extended periods of time. To sit in a landscape without moving, without making sound, without the compulsive reaching for distraction for long enough that the landscape begins to behave as if you are not there. Hunter-gatherer societies use this skill for hunting. You become still enough that prey animals cease registering you as a threat and resume their normal behavior around you. You observe, you learn. You wait. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, whose research on attention and flow states was published across decades of work, beginning in the 1990s, documented what he called the epidemic of attentional disorder in industrialized societies. Not clinical disorder, cultural disorder. The structural inability of most modern people to sustain voluntary, focused attention on a single non-stimulating task for more than a few minutes, without reaching for a phone or a screen or a sound. Your ancestors could sit in absolute silence for 4 hours watching a water hole. Not because they were different people, because they were trained for it from childhood. Because the culture they lived in demanded it, and because the survival payoff for getting it right was immediate and obvious. You were trained in the opposite direction. Every screen you have ever used, every notification system, every feed algorithm has been optimized to interrupt your attention before it can settle, not because anyone decided to destroy your capacity for stillness, but because your attention, fragmented, is worth more to the modern economy than your attention focused. Now step back from all 5 of these: tracking, fire, wayfinding, plant knowledge, stillness. Notice that every single one of them shares a common structure. They are forms of intimate, embodied relationship with the physical world. They require your full attention over extended periods of time. They develop through direct experience and repeated failure. They cannot be learned from a screen or a book or a weekend course. Though a screen or a book or a weekend course can point you toward them and notice something else, every one of them is still learnable. The path is overgrown, not paved over the ground, still holds the shape of it. You can begin to walk it imperfectly. At any age, you will be slower than someone who started as a child. You will make mistakes your great-great-grandparents would have found incomprehensible, but the knowledge exists. The practitioners exist. The elders who still hold pieces of this tradition exist in every part of the world. And most of them are desperately hoping that someone will show up and ask to be taught before it is too late. Something has been taken from you. But unlike most things that are taken, this one can still be found again.